Hey, this is Shakespeare. Dr. Daniel Larson. You can call me Dan. People usually feel one of two ways about Shakespeare. Either he's literally the greatest writer to have ever existed, or who cares about some old dead white dude. And I get it, we've been raised on a diet of Shakespeare and Shakespeare Light ever since we learned how to read. In some cases, we were told this is why we need to learn to read. But we've got to understand that behind both of these attitudes is a fundamental question. What makes any work great literature? I mean, we've made a distinction. On the one hand, there's a writing that's seen as real or high literary art, and on the other hand, there's all the crap that people actually read. But what puts a certain work into any one of these two categories? You might try to say something technical like execution or adherence to form, or maybe something even more inchoate like depth or intentionality. But you've got to realize that as soon as you start defining what makes good work great, you're really relying on socially embedded standards of goodness and greatness. A work is great because it corresponds to our inherited and often unexamined assumptions about what literature should be. So is Shakespeare the greatest writer of all time? No, he's just an old dead white dude. But his writing has come to form what we now all recognize as great literature. So he is the greatest. I mean, kind of. It might be better to say that great writing is Shakespearean. What we identify as great, in many ways, is rooted in the Shakespearean tradition. Here's where that idea gets complicated. See, Shakespeare didn't start off on any essential reading lists. Dude was a playwright, sometimes a poet. But playwrights weren't artists, the opposite often. Plays were frivolous, sometimes even shouted down as being evil or a waste of time. If we were to apply our own categories of high and low art, the Elizabethan stage would definitely be low. It's kind of how video games are viewed today. Can you imagine like 400 years from now, a bunch of college kids are sitting around and complaining like, oh, I gotta go play the Ocarina of Time again for class. So the real question we're after here is not, is Shakespeare great? But rather, why has Shakespeare's work been so influential? Part of the answer is that Shakespeare isn't really Shakespeare. I mean, the stuff we read is not exactly the stuff he wrote. Dude's had the benefit of 400 years of very well-educated editors who shaped, refined, honed, and polished his plays into precisely crafted literary works. See, Shakespeare never published his plays. All the same, they showed up in print through bootlegged copies, pirated from leftover scripts and bits and pieces audience had memorized. These cheaply made editions, often called quattros, we can talk about that if you're interested, showed up all over the place and helped spread Shakespeare's fame well beyond London. But the first time all the plays showed up in an official collection wasn't until about 7 years after his death, 1623. This is called the First Folio. It was meant to be the definitive collection of Shakespeare's works. This really tells us two things. The first is that Shakespeare always had influence with the ordinary, unwashed masses. The second is that people have always tried to redirect and control that influence. And dude is influential, both in his own time and in every era after his time. His work has some part in every literary movement. He stands behind Paradise Lost. He's the major inspiration for Gothic and later horror fiction. The plays themselves are almost archetypal in the way bits and pieces get repurposed in modern media. But this influence isn't just in the literary sphere. No, Shakespeare's also had a hand in shaping and embodying political ideologies for centuries. After the English Civil War, Shakespeare was part of the reconstructions of national identity. During the 18th century, his work was seized upon by both reactionary politics, trying to return to the good old days of God and country, and the avant-garde revolutionaries who sought to rewrite tradition. In the 19th century, as faith collapsed with the death of God and the rise of new sciences, Shakespeare's works were at the heart of a new literary canon that came to stand in for the Bible itself as the foundation of Western society. In the 20th century, while the sun was setting on British military and economic power, Shakespeare remained a central part of a cultural empire that continues to wield its influence to this day. Look, even now, every couple decades, there's a whole new crop of Shakespeare films. From the ultra-stuffy to the spectacularly violent to the kitschy edgelord I don't want to listen to my parents' high school teen romance. And as for political influence, let's just sit for a second and admire the irony that the man who wrote "There is neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so" has been domesticated as the most boring part of a public education. So when I say this class is about Shakespeare, that's what I mean. This class is about the works and the historical context they were produced to engage, but it's also about the long line of appropriations, redirections, contestations, affirmations, and adaptations that have been used both to support despotism and destroy it. It's about the text, but it's also about the people and the powers that wielded those texts. It's an investigation into form, but also an interrogation of the institutions that use those forms as forms of power. When we talk about Shakespeare, we're talking about Shakespeare, the dude who lived between 1564 and 1617 and wrote some stuff, but we're also talking about Shakespeare, the editorialized idea that has been cultivated to define our sense of good literature. So here's something from the syllabus. This course is designed as a survey of Shakespeare's major dramatic works, the histories, comedies, tragedies, and later tragicomedies or romances. In addition to studying the plays themselves, we'll also consider the literary, artistic, and cultural traditions that spring from them, finding ways that we, as 21st century audiences, viewers, readers, and critics, can use our contemporary points of view to inform our interpretations. To better understand these texts, we'll consider two distinct adaptations of Shakespeare's plays. First, the written text. Second, a recent film adaptation. Look, when we're dealing with Shakespeare, the only original is the thing that happened on stage 400 years ago. We have no access to that. That means that both the text you read and the film you watch are different kinds of adaptations. By the way, this is why something like No Fear Shakespeare isn't really appropriate for this class. That's a completely different adaptation. We'll get into different theories of adaptation as we move through class. For the most part, our time together on Thursdays will be spent thinking through ways adaptations make choices. In addition to these adaptations, our class discussions will draw from live performances, viral videos, pop culture references, and critical academic essays to articulate our own interpretations of Shakespeare's works and the social, historical, and political implications they carry. The course will cultivate students' analytic and critical thinking skills through reading plays and viewing films, critical and reflective writing, and group discussions. In addition to the content of the plays and films, students will demonstrate a working knowledge of the historical backgrounds of Elizabethan and Jacobean England, and familiarity with a variety of literary theoretical concepts. Here's just a quick note on some of our major assignments for the course. You can find all the details in the assignment sheets in the course files module on Moodle. We've really got 5 things going on in the class. We've got podcasts, character analysis posts, focused discussions, the historical analysis paper, and the adaptation project. Read over all the assignment sheets very carefully, and let me know if you have any questions. Here's the thing about distance learning. See, in a regular semester, you're sitting in a classroom for 3 hours a week. You're going to learn something, whether you want to or not. But in distance learning, that osmosis doesn't really work the same. You've got to stay engaged. But the real trick is staying engaged when it comes to April. I've tried really hard to put this course together in a way that helps you stay connected, but really it's up to you to make that happen. Here's just a couple tips. Set yourself a schedule to do the reading, watch the films, work on assignments, and view video lectures, sort of like this one. Treat it as if you were in class. Don't check your phone, don't open other windows, just stick with it. Come to those optional student hour meetings on Tuesdays and ask questions about the plays, and certainly come to all required Thursday meetings. If you can, when you're in a meeting, turn your camera on. I mean, if you can't, don't sweat it. But if you can, it does make a big difference for you. Okay, I think that's really about it. There is one more thing. I've spent all this time talking about Shakespeare and his influence. But look, there's something else too. See, our way of studying literature as an academic discipline is pretty new. For a long time, before that, people looked at literature as a way to better understand what it means to be human. Part of all this talk about who reserves the right to interpret literature is really tied up in larger ideas about who gets to explain what counts as the human experience. But it also means that in these books we can find all sorts of wisdom for growth and for healing. That's really why we read in the first place. That's why anyone ever cared about poems or plays or books or stories. Look, I'll be honest with you. I'm not the sort of person who grieves in public. I often feel like I don't know how to perform sorrow in ways that make sense to other people. Shakespeare said, "My grief all lies within, and the external manners of lament are merely shadows of unseen grief that swells in silence." I'm trying to hold it together. If I just come in here and give you a bunch of talk about the syllabus, it would be a lie. Community has had a big loss. I've had a big loss. My colleague, my mentor, my friend. Maybe some of you didn't really know Billie Jean, but I know a lot of you did. Look, even if you didn't, we're in a season of mourning right now for 1,000 reasons. It's a heavy time. Heavy time, I mean, this is why people read, articulate grief or sorrow or any sort of feeling that is an injustice to name. When we read, there's not like a right or wrong, and there's not like a good or bad way to feel pain or to grieve about things. Literature helps us maybe understand there are many ways of being human in sadness. I want to read you guys something. This is something that's been kind of heavy on me for the last couple days, and maybe you'll think about it too. This is from a play called Cymbeline. Cymbeline is a tragic comedy. We'll get tragic comedies near the end of the course. And, the cool thing about a tragic comedy is that it looks like everything is tending towards destruction and failure. And at the end, everything comes together. Turns out to be okay. Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the frivolous winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and taken thy wages. Fear no more the frown of the great, thou art past the tyrant's stroke. Care no more to clothe and eat, to thee the reed is as the oak. Fear no more the lightning flash, nor the all-dreaded thunderstone. Fear not slander, censure rash, thou hast finished joy and moan. All lovers young, all lovers must consign to thee and come to dust. No exorciser harm thee, no witchcraft charm thee. Ghost unlaid forbear thee, nothing ill come near thee. Quiet consummation have, and renowned be thy grave.